Hello, I'm Remington. Welcome. So I stopped making videos last year. I think it was about 6 or 7 months ago now. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. I moved, I didn't have a lot of time, work was getting stressful. But also I just wasn't reading as much and I felt like I didn't have all that much to say. I didn't completely stop reading. I hit my reading goal of 52 books last year. I was actually planning on doing an end of year recap like a lot of people do, but I just didn't get around to it until around February, and by then I just kind of lost interest in it altogether and decided not to do it. But I'm still reading. I have a goal for 56 books this year, half of what I read last year, just because I know that I'm not going to be able to keep up that same pace this year. And due to me not reading nearly as much, I don't anticipate making mini videos on this channel this year. I am going to be doing these quarterly recaps instead of monthly recaps like I was doing for a while last year. That way I feel like I can actually have something of substance whenever I do put anything out. And I do have some ideas for other videos that I'd like to do regarding books on this channel. But I'm not going to commit to anything. I'm not going to commit to more than the quarterly recaps. But anyway, that's more than enough housekeeping. Let's actually get into the books. The first book I read this year was Divergent by Veronica Roth. I first saw the movie when it came out in theaters. I think it was like 2014 or something like that. I saw it with my family. I basically thought that it was a worse version of The Hunger Games. And I stand by that take, because as I read this, I felt like, and it's been a while since I've read The Hunger Games, so maybe this isn't completely fair, but I felt like this was just so full of teenage angst, and it did not feel original in any kind of way. The only reason why I did actually read this book was because it was a gift from a girl that I was going out with at the time. And yeah, I did not like this book. If I was not interested in that girl at the time, I would not have picked this up, and I definitely wouldn't have finished it. I don't remember what I gave it on Goodreads, but it's not like a worthless book. It's not like it's not well put together, although I think there are very many parts that are not well written. I'd say 2.5 stars for Divergent. Next up, that's the back of the book. I read Red Rising by Pierce Brown. And this book, I absolutely adored. A lot of people have criticism for the first book, and after I started reading reviews after I had read it, I understand those criticisms, and I can't say that they're invalid, because they're not. But as I was reading this, I had no criticisms. None at all. It was like crack for the primal masculine part of my brain. It did the same thing for me that watching Braveheart does, especially at the end when William Wallace is dying and he just shouts freedom. Like, the same feeling that gives me, I got from this book. It was definitely just crack for my brain. The criticisms of it are fairly valid. It's kind of sexist in its portrayal of women. It is oddly structured. The first-person viewpoint and how it conceals the twists from you is a little bit odd, and personally I think it gets worse throughout the next 2 books in the series. But this was a wonderful start that I thoroughly enjoyed. I gave it 5 stars. I don't know if I reread it if I would give it 5 stars again. But I do really like this book. It was very good. And then immediately after that, I read Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. And this book, as most people believe it to be, is the same but better. It's so much broader than the first book. The first book is fairly contained on a singular planet, but this one basically breaks out into galactic warfare, whereas the other one was more like medieval tribal warfare. This is at a much grander scale. It is more tightly written. The characters feel much better. There's less of the problems that was in the first book. I don't think I had any problems with this book as I was reading it, and looking back on it, I can't think of any either. The same twist problem is there where, because it's written again from a first person viewpoint, you know, the main character knows the twist that's going to happen, but he doesn't tell you. And so that kind of feels odd at a couple points, but there's nothing that was horrible or jarring while I was reading it. So I really enjoyed this book, and I would highly recommend anyone who is into science fiction to read these books, because even though I have a problem with the next one, which we'll get into in a second, everyone I've talked to about these books really enjoys them. They're honestly like crack for my brain, like I said about the first one. I don't want to get too much into the plot, because personally I like discovering the plot for myself. I don't like knowing much about a book before I go in. That's something that I like about TikTok, or Book Talk, by the way, is just the vibes-based recommendations, because I don't want to know anything about the plot or the twists or anything like that. I just want to know the general vibe, so I can have something to know about and something to look forward to and not go completely blind. But I like discovering things for myself. Oh no, I misplaced a book and I don't know where it is, so I'll put a picture of it right here. The Stranger by, oh god, what's his name? Albert Camus. I think that's his name. Hopefully I'm not wrong. This book was weird. This was one of those that I had no idea what it was about going in. I just knew that it was a classic and that many people really like it, and that a lot of people have to read it in school. I had very little feelings when reading this book. It was kind of odd. I was just kind of waiting for something to happen. And I mean, not that things don't happen in the book, obviously, but it felt as if I expected there to be a more prominent storyline than there was. Like some kind of twist was going to happen or something like that, but there's not. It is a very simple, straightforward story about a man who doesn't care. He's checked out. Life doesn't mean anything to him anymore. And it was very sad, but very empty as well. Like, he really didn't care about anything. And that was just kind of hard to take in. Like, how do you care about a character who doesn't care about anything? Like, things kind of just happen to him and he just goes along. He doesn't fight anything. And of course there's a certain power to that in the story, but there's just an overall emptiness that came to me from reading the book, and I think that's kind of the point. But it was kind of disheartening in a way to relate to the main character in some senses. There's, you know, the whole idea of male loneliness that has been pretty prominent online for a while, and a lot of that can be seen not exactly the same, because obviously this is far before social media and terminally online people, which I think plays a lot into male loneliness. But the same kind of persona can be seen in this man, of just being checked out, not caring about anything. And although thankfully I can't completely relate, I can a little bit. And that was kind of uncomfortable and scary to see something that I've watched people turn into, and that I have started to go down that path before. It was unpleasant. I can't say that I enjoyed the book at all. It does very well to capture that kind of just checked out mentality. I don't remember what I gave it on Goodreads because I read it a while ago, but I think 3.5 stars. Okay, so this is my least favorite book that I have read this year, and it's Morningstar. Like I said earlier, I found this book to be horribly disappointing. The first 70 pages of this book were absolute banger book material. Like, it was so good. I was so in love with what was happening. The next 30 or so pages were okay, a little disappointing. Then from page 100 to about 400, it was very solid. Not quite as good as Golden Star in some ways, but it was very solid and I had very few complaints. And then certain things started happening. I'm not going to get too much into spoilers in this video because I'm planning on making a video about the trilogy at some point. I don't know when, and I'm not even going to guarantee that it's actually ever going to come out. But if I do make that video, I'll get more into spoilers and that. The same thing that I was talking about for the other two books, of how the first person viewpoint and how that conceals information in a way that feels very dishonest, really just took me out of the end of the book. It felt so cheap and dishonest, and just like an extra twist because Pierce Brown, obviously I don't know if this is true, but it felt like he just didn't know how to make the end interesting and not predictable, so he decided to do what he did here. If you know, you know. And that just completely, it almost ruined the whole trilogy for me. Like, after I read this and after I finished it, I was so disappointed. I was so done. I was like, I'm never going to read anything more by Pierce Brown. I never want to even think about Red Rising again. And the more I sat with it, the more okay with it I got. I still hate the end of this book. I still hate what he did, but it doesn't poison the other two as much as I thought it was going to in the long term. And I still plan on reading the other books in the series, because from the people I've talked to, I've heard that he gets better about how he does the first person viewpoint and the twists along with it. So hopefully that will be less jarring in the way that this was. But aside from those last 100 pages, the characters in this book are so lovely. The progression and the growth seen, and specifically the main character, was really lovely to see. I really enjoyed watching him grow and the challenges that he wrestles with as he's going along his journey. I don't think I can in good conscience recommend that you read this book without first acknowledging the horrible twist at the end. Although I haven't seen that many people be as upset with it as I was. To most people, it didn't bother them that much, from what I gather. But if something like that sounds like it's going to bother you, I would suggest that you look up, before you start Morningstar, after you finish Golden Sun, look up the twist. I don't know if I can even recommend that. I don't know if I can recommend spoiling the book for you. I don't know. You do you. Know that there is something in here that might bother you. It might not. Make your own decision. I rated Morningstar at 1 star on Goodreads because it pissed me off so much, and I usually rate books right after I read them. So I don't even know if I'd change it now. I think I probably would. I'd probably give it like 2.5 stars, because even though the ending I think is terrible, there is so much in it that is very fulfilling, especially considering where it's coming from with the 2 previous books, that it is worth the read. I just wish the ending were not terrible. Everything else I've read so far this year have all been nonfiction books. Due to the circumstances that the world is going through right now, particularly the Palestinian genocide, I've decided that I need to become a lot more knowledgeable. And although that was something that I was already working on, I've decided that it needs to be much more of a emphasis that I'm putting on of becoming knowledgeable on politics and history, and hopefully to some degree being able to make somewhat of a change in the future, because I don't like the way that our country's going. And I understand going forward, as I talk about more political and religious and overall less fiction in general, not no fiction, but less fiction. I understand that booktube can be kind of an escape for people, and they just want to hear about fantasy and sci-fi and that kind of stuff, and that's fine. If this is your escape and this takes you out of that, that's fine. But it's something that is important to me and a road that I really think that I need to go down. So that's where I'm headed. If you want to come along for the journey, cool. If not, totally understand. For all of these nonfiction books, I'm also writing companion mini essays, which are basically just a way for me to take the notes that I've written down while I'm reading the book, and through exploring those notes further and rewriting them into a more organized essay. It's a way for me to retrod the knowledge in the book, to basically re-experience it and reinforce it in my mind, as well as create something structured and concise that I can revisit to, again, get these same ideas from the book and refresh the ideas in my mind. Anyway, enough rambling about things that are not books. The first nonfiction book I read this year was Educated by Tara Westover. Going into this book, I'm not super proud of the ideas that I had about what the book was going to be. So Educated is a memoir by Tara Westover, basically telling the story of her growing up on a mountain in Utah with a family that was very religious. They were Mormon, fanatically so, and it tells her story of sibling abuse, of parental neglect, of her almost complete lack of schooling, of the many accidents that her family, brothers and father go through, and how she sees the repercussions of that, because her mother is a natural herbalist healer, and so she very much sees like the healing process that they all go through, and the way that they change from not getting proper medical treatment. And there's very much a cult-like vibe to the family in general, and how strongly they hold to their belief, and how against anything that is not Mormon is such a huge threat to them. I went into this book thinking that I was going to get some kind of vindication for how I felt towards my parents with my subpar education through homeschooling and the religious indoctrination that I went through. But for the most part, that was not the case, because the difference in how neglectful and how bad Tara's parents are as parents, I don't think they're necessarily bad people. I think they have good intentions. They're just very terrible. They're terrible parents. They're just bad. And while I certainly don't agree with everything about the way that I was raised, my parents really did try, and they did the best that they could, and they have been mostly supportive of me every step along the way, even as I've deviated from what they wanted me to be. Whereas in this book, when Tara starts questioning things and starts getting more outside information, she gets more and more cut off from her family. This book is a very powerful illustration of religious fanaticism, of cult-like tendencies, and of escaping to a new world where you have to shake off all the information that you had, all this indoctrination that you've gone through, and figure out for yourself what is real, what is reality, because most of what you've been taught growing up is just not true. And how do you navigate that? I really thought that this was a wonderful book, and I'd highly recommend that anyone who came from a religious background and is no longer religious or has changed to a different religion, I'd highly recommend that you check this book out, because I think that in many ways you will be able to relate to it strongly. And if you had not horrible parents, it will probably give you a much better appreciation for your parents, like it did for me. Next up, we have What We Owe the Future by William McGaskill. I really enjoyed this book. It was very insightful, and it gave me many framing devices for how to think about how we live and how we're affecting change in our world. The main thesis of the book, the main thing that William McGaskill is really driving home, is what he calls long-termism. Basically the idea that humanity is in its infancy right now, and that there will be many more generations to come. Humanity could exist for millions, if not billions of years into the future, and the vast majority of people who will ever live have not been born yet. And so that we should be making decisions that will positively affect them in the future. For the most part, I think that this book is very well written and very well thought out. He talks about many of the main problems that he expects humanity to be facing in the coming years. Everything from environmentalism to AI to morality. And for the most part, I think he covers them quite well. I don't think that this book is perfect. It does kind of miss the mark in a few areas. First of all, it doesn't call for any kind of social or political change. William McGaskill is part of the effective altruism movement, which is basically the idea that people with wealth should be donating portions of their wealth to charities that have been proven to be highly effective. And while that is certainly a good thing, and I'm not going to tell anyone not to do that, I think it ignores the fact that a lot of society's problems are systematic and cannot just be changed by people donating money. We need social and governmental changes, and that's not something that is really advocated in this book, and I think it's kind of a little bit of a miss and kind of subtracts from the total. I also found the idea of population morality that he lays out in this book to be kind of concerning. And he admits that it's a very complicated field of philosophy himself, but it feels kind of authoritarian to me that just a few people could be deciding these huge decisions that affect all of humanity. Who gets to make those decisions, and who gets to say that they're right or wrong? Also, I do take a little bit of issue with the idea that William McGaskill puts forward at the beginning of the book, that a future life is worth the exact same as a life today. Well, there's a certain truth to that obviously somebody existing in the future, when they're alive and living, they are no more or less valuable than I am today. But right now they're just a potential life. And to prioritize a potential life in the future at the expense of a real life today, to me, feels wrong. And so when you are solely focusing on problems that are affecting us in the future, I think that that's kind of a miss when there's problems that we have today. There's a lot of problems that overlap, like environmentalism, for example, is something that we need to solve for the immediate reality as well as for future generations. But some things we could put off for a while we figure out the problems that we have today. But like I said earlier, it's a very useful framing device for how can you go about helping the most people as you can. Because, I'm a very privileged guy, and helping people makes me happy. So that's something that I'm interested in. Even if that's a little corny, Next up is the first really political book that I read, and it's not even a book, it's a pamphlet. It's not even 30 pages long, but it's The Principles of Communism by Frederick Engels. And I, first of all, am not a communist, but I'm not closed off to the idea either. So this book is basically just a set of questions, or like a FAQ, frequently asked questions, of what communism is, what it isn't, and some of the core principles. And I already knew a good chunk of this, but it clarified some things and also gave me a whole bunch more questions. For the most part, it doesn't go deep enough because it's just a very like surface level explanation of what it is, so I will need to look further into communist literature to really get these questions answered. But I don't think right now my main problems with communism in general are it doesn't do enough or almost anything to settle the problem of inequality, because you're going to have a few people on top who get to make changes and decisions for everyone else beneath them, and I don't see how that could possibly not lead to at least some kind of corruption. Basically, you'd have to have good, well-intentioned people in power to be able to maintain that, and I don't think that that is an easy or realistic thing to always have. And that also kind of leads into my main problem with communism, which is it seems like it is incredibly fragile. Altogether, it seems like it is so reliant on good people being in charge of it to maintain these systems. And I don't see how that could last over generations with people who want to get in power and want to abuse that power for their personal gain, as we've seen throughout all of history. How is that not going to lead to massive corruption? And I feel like corruption in a communist government would be worse than in a capitalist government, which is bad. Like, capitalism is bad and I'm not fond of it. But communism seems like a very weak form of government that is even more susceptible to that. So, but again, haven't engaged with any more of the literature than this, so maybe those questions are answered somewhere else, and I look forward to thinking more about it and digging more into it in the future. Then we have Stop Saving the Planet, an Environmentalist Manifesto by Jenny Price. This book, in a similar way to What We Owe the Future, I got some very good mental framing devices from this, but overall I was pretty disappointed. It is very repetitive. It kind of feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be like a very intro level book, or does it want to be addressing problems that experienced environmentalists have? And it flip-flops between those two, which makes both of those feel cheaper in a way. I also didn't like the complete lack of any scientific citation. It's not trying to be an academic book, but when it completely lacks any at all, I think it very much hurts the overall value of the book, because if somebody who wasn't convinced of environmentalism already was reading this and they saw that there's no citations, it would just be a very easy point to dismiss the book by. Not that there's anything that's not true as far as I know in the book. Like, all of these things you could Google pretty easily. But a little bit of citation would have been really nice. A few of the things that I did like about the book were mainly the idea that the environment is everything. It's everywhere. It's in this room. It's outside. It's not just the national park. It's not just forests. The environment is everywhere, and everything we do affects it for better or for worse. And I really liked the way it portrays economy as something that needs to work together with the environment for equitable change for all people. I thought that that was a very nice explanation and a very nice viewpoint to take. The sort of decoupling economic growth specifically for growth and more for human well-being and environmental well-being in general. I wouldn't really recommend this book, if I'm being honest. I haven't read a whole lot of environmental literature, so I can't recommend anything in its place, but I feel like there has to be so many better books than this. Not that it was horrible, not that you're not going to get anything out of it. It just, for what it is, it was disappointing. Then I read We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This book is based off of her TED Talk, it covers the same material, so if you don't want to pick up the book, but you're interested in it, just watch her TED Talk. It's, as far as I've gathered, it's the same. But I really liked this book. It was a very nice, personal story of her growing up as a feminist, and just the story of how the people around her frowned upon feminism in general, and how even her friends thought that she was too radical in her beliefs. But through different experiences and different events happening in her life and her friends being around to witness those, they eventually kind of gather like, oh, you do have a point. We really don't value you in the same way that we value men. And there's nothing super extreme in this book. Like, there's no hardcore repression or anything, but it's a very realistic story that I'm sure a lot of women and oppressed people in general can relate to. I really think that feminism is kind of like a litmus test to, are you on the right side in general? Like, are you okay with people who are different than you in one way or another, whether it's a different gender, or if they're a different race, or if they're a different nationality or religion than you? Is that okay? Do you view them as the same as you, as far as being a human with rights who deserves respect, or do you view them as lesser than you because they're not in the same tribe as you? I really think that feminism is the most basic test for that. Like, if you are not on board with feminism, then you are okay with oppressing people in general. That being said, I am a man and I am very biased and not perfect at all. And that's something that I want to be better about. Yeah. And the last book that I read, I just finished it a couple days ago, is Angela Davis's Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I really liked this book. It's a collection of speeches, as well as, I think, one interview that she had with a gentleman. And because of the format, it's slightly repetitive, and for the most part is a surface level covering of these issues of, Ferguson, Palestine, feminism, abolition, prison abolition specifically. But it very much set my mind in the right place to think about, how do I want to address the issues that I see in the world moving forward? How do I want to go about addressing political change? It also gave me a whole bunch of different things to look further into and more things to research. And just getting to know more of Angela Davis's story in general was pretty cool, because I knew almost nothing about her before reading this book. And she seemed pretty cool. I definitely look forward to reading more of what she's written. Anyway, that's what I've read in the last 3 months. I hope you enjoyed me rambling about these books. It's been a while since I've done anything like this, so it was very rough and off the cuff, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good day.